And another very simple question based on a similar idea. I want you to do this now straight away. It's very simple. Question 13. Ready? It's a simple one. So let's have a look. US citizen employed and works in Poland. Because they are a US citizen, whatever they produce, whatever output they will generate will become part of American GNP, national product. So will contribute towards part of American GNP, national product, which means that we can eliminate answer C and D because they're about GDP. It's not correct. We are only left with these two options, A and B. Next, let's have a look at Poland. Because they work in Poland, they're employed in Poland, whatever they produce will become part of Polish GDP, domestic product, part of Polish GDP, domestic product, produced domestically in Poland, within Polish borders. Polish GDP is here. It's appearing in answer A, which means that we can eliminate B, and we are left with A as the only correct answer. A is the correct answer, just by elimination. So that's a simple exercise. And now we proceed to another set of questions which are quite important. I want you to do exercises 10 and 11. So let's spend about 10 minutes doing this. They are focusing on the difference between nominal and real GDP. You can refer to the formula. Question 10 is about the formula. You can find it in your lecture notes in the previous week. So if you download lecture notes, you can use your smartphones, download lecture slides, you will be able to see the formula for real and nominal GDP. Have a look at what exactly it means. And in question 11, you apply this formula to calculate the rate of economic growth. So let's have a look at these two exercises. Exercise 10 is simply the formula for real GDP. It simply asks you how exactly a real GDP is calculated. A real GDP can be calculated as nominal GDP divided by price index or price level. Why do we need to calculate this? Because real GDP measures the value of output. It's the measure of value. So value of output. And value consists of two elements. It combines the actual output, physical production, actual output in units, how many desks we have managed to produce in units, times price of each unit, price of each, times price of those desks. And whenever we experience growth in GDP, when we see increase in the value of output, it can come from increase in real production or from inflation. For example, we've produced one desk in a particular day and we've sold it at £100. Next day, we've produced one desk and sold it at £150. Does it really mean that our economy is growing? No, in fact, it's not 50% growth. In fact, we are suffering from 50% inflation. We still produce the same amount as before. We still have the same amount of jobs and vacancies available. We still generate the same physical output, but we suffer from increasing inflation. So generally, when you analyze, when you focus on the growth in the value of output, in other words, in nominal GDP, so let me just go there. It's actually nominal GDP. When you focus on the nominal GDP only, you can misinterpret these increases which come from purely inflationary effects rather than from effect of actual production. And in order to make meaningful comparisons, in order to determine whether your economy is growing over the long term or not, you will need to calculate real GDP. In other words, you will need to deflate your nominal GDP data. You will need to take this increasing process into account. And to do this, you simply divide this by price level. When price level is increasing, this will reduce the growth of your real GDP. And question 11 asks you to do just that. This question is very important, and it is important that you understand this. It is based on the differences between real and nominal GDP. And there was a separate video lesson on this, and there was a slide here in this folder, nominal versus real GDP. It's an important difference, and you need to understand this. Even for your future, even when you will write any report or in your professional life, you will need to understand the difference between nominal and real values. So nominal GDP is simply GDP calculated in monetary terms. So whatever is stated, like the value of the desk is £50, this is the nominal GDP. Real GDP will take into account the changes in prices over the years. For example, this year we sold this desk at 50 pounds. Next year we've sold the desk, same desk at 60 pounds. Nominal GDP has increased from 50 to 60, but the real production remained the same. It's still the same one desk. So generally, we need to take into account the inflationary effects. And when we analyze the increase in standards of living over time, we'll need to focus on real GDP, because this is what will show how much more we actually produce. And to calculate real GDP, what we do, we take nominal GDP, and divide by price index. There are different price indexes, and this is what we'll cover this week in a lecture on inflation. It can be presented in two forms, as a GDP deflator or as a CPI index, consumer price index. But you will be given some numbers and you can be asked to calculate real GDP. So GDP deflator is one of the price indexes, GDP deflator. So let's have a look what information we've got. GDP in current prices grows, current prices, which means it's a nominal GDP. This is our nominal GDP, from 120 in year 1 to 160 in year 2. Let me just rewrite it in a slightly more convenient format. Year 1 and year 2, our nominal GDP looks like this. So it was 120 billion and it has increased to 160 billion. GDP deflator, on another hand, price index, increases from 100 to 130, right? So we need to calculate how much has real GDP has grown, real GDP. If we simply look at this data, it might look like we have increased our production from 120 to 160, which is not the case, because basically this increase, this change, does not represent the true increase in production, because quite a lot of this increase in nominal value will come from effect of prices. What is value? Value is price times quantity. So nominal GDP actually includes quantity, actual production level, times prices. And the actual value can increase due to increase in quantity or prices. And we did experience increase in the price index in reality. So let's try to get rid of this inflationary effect. And to do this, we apply our formula. Real GDP is equal to nominal GDP divided by price index. So real GDP is nominal GDP 120 divided by price index. It's going to be 120 in real terms now. Nominal GDP in year 2 is 160. And we divide this by price index, which is 130, which is going to be equal to, calculator, 160 divided by 130, which will be 1, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Right. Now we need to calculate rate of change. So we can see that the actual increase in our real production is not that significant. It's an increase from 1.2 to 1.23. Let's calculate the change in real GDP now. The rate of economic growth. Change in real GDP. Now it will be calculated as 123, our new value, as we've always calculated percentage changes, minus the original value, 1.2, divided by the original value times 100%. So it will be 0.03 divided by 1.20 times 100%. So this minus 1.2 divided by 1.2 times 100%, which will be 2.5%, 256%. So this is the rate of economic growth. This is the actual rate of economic growth in a country, which is realistic. Well, in fact, if you look at these numbers, 120 and 160, it might look like your nominal GDP has increased by considerably more. 160 minus 120 divided by 120 times 100, which is going to be 40 divided by 120, which is a third, which is 33%. So if you try to present these figures demonstrating an increase in GDP by 33%, this will be totally wrong because the true growth is actually 2.5%. And majority of this large increase came from this increase in prices. Prices have increased by 30% during this period. And this is what pushed the value of your desks or whatever you produce up, not the increase in real production. The real production has only increased by 2.5%. So this is what the increase in real GDP. 2.5%. There will be questions based on this in the exam, and it is important. So please make sure that you cover this yourself and do some extra practice. There will be some more exercises, for example, exercise 10, asking you about the relationship between real and nominal GDP. Some other data on how exactly GDP is calculated. Please make sure that you do this. And there will be a separate section to this on economic growth and short-run fluctuations. I've uploaded the video lectures already. Please make sure that you go through this as well. There will be questions on this in exam. Economic growth is simply an increase in real GDP, in real output. We don't measure growth by analyzing the values because it will include inflationary effects. We analyze the increase, increase in output, assuming that prices remain constant. So what macroeconomists do, we select a particular year, for example, 2000 or 2020, as our base year. And we fix the prices for all goods in the economy using the prices from this particular year. This becomes our constant prices. And then we recalculate all data for GDP using these prices. So this allows us to analyze changes in the physical production. Prices remain constant, they're the same. These are prices from the base year, right? So resulting changes in real output will represent change in actual production. Your base year can be any year. It's up to you, whatever is more convenient to you. So in some databases, you will see, let's say, 1990 as your base year, or 2000, or 2020. It doesn't really matter. It will simply will generate different resulting time series, but the actual effects will be absolutely the same. If you calculate percentage changes, they will be absolutely the same. It doesn't matter what base year you select for your purposes. It doesn't affect anything. You can choose whatever you like. But it's important to include some sort of measure of inflation in your analysis. It's the most common mistake which I see in student dissertations. I do supervise quite a lot of economics dissertations, and which rely on analysis of time series data. So students select data on investment in a particular economy, or increase in entrepreneurial activity, or on whatever, on employment growth, and they do compare this with GDP figures. And of course, more students use nominal data without any adjustment for inflation, which is a very, very common mistake. And unfortunately, it's a serious mistake. It implies that you don't understand the time series analysis completely. So please make sure that you are aware of this for your future coursework. Whenever you need to analyze macroeconomic time series, make sure that you use real data, convert it or adjust it to take into account your inflation. So simply divide your time series by price index, and that's it. And then you will work. It's just one extra step. It will take you 2 minutes in Excel. Simply divide your data by price index and then work with whatever you've got. Then your results will have some meaning. Otherwise, they will become totally invalid. So this is how we've done exercise 11. Any questions based on that? It's important. It's important for any analysis you do in the future using macroeconomic data. So please make sure for your future professional practice. Okay, no questions, right? Any issues with that? No? Okay, let's focus on exercise 14 now, which is short-run economic fluctuations. It's a simple one. Let's just spend a few minutes on this one. Okay, let's have a look at this one. This question asks you about the business cycle. Business cycle represents a set of short-term economic fluctuations around the trend which follow a specific pattern. So if you draw a little sketch, little diagram, it will look like this. Let's imagine that we have a timeline along horizontal axis, and we have GDP along vertical axis. We measure GDP. And GDP follows a particular long-term trend, which shows that our real economic growth is about, let's say, 2 to 3% per year. This is a normal average amount for developed countries per year, real growth in real terms. We never use nominal values in macroeconomics. In real terms, our economy is growing at about 2 to 3% per year. Developing countries are growing at a quicker rate, maybe 6, 7, 10%. Chinese economy grew at about 10% for the last 2 decades approximately every single year. In the last couple of years, they have slowed down to about 6 to 7%, but even these lower rates of growth are unthinkable for the UK or American or any European country. We grow at much lower rates. This is the trend, but in reality, each and every year, the growth can be higher or lower than 2 to 3%. For example, let's say in 2000, we grew at a rate of, let's say, 7%. For example, I don't remember what was the correct answer, but let's imagine that we grew it at 7%. Let's imagine that last year, in 2019, we grew at 2%. While this year, because of the pandemic, our growth rate is minus 15%. So sometimes we grow, let's change this to 4, otherwise it won't be above the trend. In some years, we grow at a rate above the trend. In some years, we still grow, but at a lower rate. For example, let's say in 2006 or 7, we have grown, but the rate of growth was lower than the long-term trend, the long-term average. So generally, our GDP in each particular year fluctuates around this trend. Sometimes we grow quicker, sometimes we grow slower. And the pattern of these fluctuations around the trend is called the business cycle. There are 4 stages in the business cycle. There is a peak of the business cycle. This is the situation when the economy is booming. There is a bottom of the cycle, which is called trough or depression. The movement from the peak to the bottom, when the economy is declining, when the economy slows down, is called recession or slowdown in economic activity. Slowdown. And when the economy recovers from the bottom and moves towards its peak, is called a recovery period or expansion. Different textbooks might use different terms, but the idea is the same. You are at the top, you are at the bottom, you are declining, slowing down, or you are expanding. That's it. And based on this information, let's have a look at what options are available. When we move between the peak and trough, in other words, when we are located in this stage of the business cycle, it's called a recession. It's a slowdown in economic activity. It's not a complete cycle, because complete cycle includes all 4 stages, and we are only talking about one stage. It's not an expansion, because we are moving down from the top to the bottom. And it's not a change in the economic trend, because the black line, the black arrow, the trend itself remains intact. It's still, our economy is still growing in the long term by about 2 to 3% per year, and that's it. It doesn't matter what happens this particular year. The long-term average remains unchanged. The long-term trend can change. It can and does change, and it will probably change after this year due to the effects of the pandemic. For example, let's imagine that in 2012, when the pandemic started, we have lost some of our labor force. Let's say 1 million people died because of the pandemic. Could this happen? Probably. We have lost some of our labor force, which means that our production potential for the future will be lower. We will be able to produce lower output because we have lost some of our citizens. And apart from this, we have also probably lost some of the production capacity, because many businesses went bankrupt, and they will become bankrupt in the next couple of months. Even more businesses will go bust. For example, restaurants, cafes, maybe hair salons, people which rely on close contact between people, which were shut down for social distancing purposes, they might not survive this pandemic, and they will go bankrupt. And as a result, these businesses will stop existing. They will not produce output in the future, in the next years. They went out of business. They went bankrupt. These people who work there might be able to start up new businesses, but it might take them a while to develop their businesses to start producing the same amount of output as before. And as a result, due to the effect of the pandemic, we can actually move onto the lower trend. Instead of operating on this trend, black trend, which we used to enjoy for the last decade, for example, now we had to move to a much lower trend. And as a result, we can still grow at 2 to 3% per year, but we'll start from a lower base due to the effect of the pandemic. So this was a pandemic effect. And then our actual output will start fluctuating like that around lower trend. Or what can also happen if, for example, we invest into our economy, government runs a huge support program. For example, this is what Americans are doing. They're rolling out huge package of financial incentives. They support their population. This is called helicopter money. They literally send out checks to every household to support them so that they can still have some money to spend. They've printed lots of money. They try to boost their economy. And if this money is used appropriately, for example, by developing infrastructure, by training population, by providing additional training, developing skills, developing human capital, maybe encouraging entrepreneurial activities, this will provide a boost to the economy for the future. Because when you train your population, when you develop their skills, when you train them how to start up businesses, when you support these startups, it will increase your future production potential. And as a result, the economy can start growing quicker. So your trend line can pivot upwards starting from this year when this particular support program was implemented. So that in the future, our normal growth rate can increase to, let's say, 3 to 5%. And our economy, or American economy, will fluctuate around this trend instead. So generally, there are factors which will affect our production in the short production capacity in the short and in the long run. In the short run, our output depends on the location of aggregate demand curve. So generally, depending on whether aggregate demand is high or low, we will produce high or lower level of output, which will determine whether we have high or low employment and unemployment level, whether we have high or low inflation rate. However, for the future, for future production potential, for what we can produce in the long run, what will matter is the location of aggregate supply curve. And by implementing these new initiatives, by new infrastructure development programs, which will allow us to pivot our growth trend, long run trend. This is GDP, and this is timeline. By implementing this investment in infrastructure and so on, by implementing supply-side policies, we can pivot the trend, we can increase our production potential in the future, we can boost our aggregate supply, and as a result, our economy can move towards this new equilibrium point, which will determine our long-run potential output. Our potential output will now become higher, regardless of the location of aggregate demand. So this graph, the idea of aggregate demand basically allows you to analyze so many complex things. It will allow you to understand the effects of economic policies, which will affect the economy both in the current period and in the future. You simply shift different curves. So this is an illustration of how powerful this model, demand and supply model, is. You can even analyze macroeconomic economic policy. And we'll have a separate lecture on this towards the end of this module. I think this is all I wanted to cover with you in this particular session. There are some other questions which we haven't covered. I actually provided some information now for you for question 4. You should be able to do it now based on what we've covered. It's a question asking you about current and potential output, right? And I've also given you some hints for question 3, level of national income due to some changes, which depends on the location of aggregate demand curve. You should be able to tackle these questions yourself. But I've recorded the answers to these questions and they're available on Moodle as a video seminar. So please try to do these exercises yourself and then check your solutions and have a look at this video seminar. Okay? What questions do you have based on this? I guess microeconomics is not relevant anymore. I guess you're not interested in any microeconomic topics because you've had your exam. Regarding macro, let's focus on macro now. What questions would you like to ask me? We have about like 10 minutes left. Would you like to ask me anything? No? I would say that macroeconomics is easier. It's easier than micro because there is some new material, obviously, but it's linked to each other. So if you understand the logic, you should be able to understand everything. Okay, I'll stop it here then. Thank you very much for joining me. Please stay safe and I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.